Board meeting to order. The hour is on us. Welcome, everybody. To my right is Board Member Chris Shirt and Mrs. Stuart Halsell, and my name is Dennis Tooley, and I will chair the meeting. This time I'll turn it over to our solicitor, Kilgore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Keith Kilgore. I'm the solicitor for the zoning hearing board. The chairman has introduced all of the other members. We're going to mark and admit the following exhibits relative to this hearing. Exhibit number 17 is the notice of public hearing. Exhibit number 8 is various emails to the Daily News, plus copies of the publication of this notice of hearing in the Daily News. Exhibit number 19 is an affidavit of mailing to various government officials and affected landowners. Exhibit 20 is an affidavit of the zoning officer of the posting of the property, of the notice of this hearing, and pictures of the same. Exhibit number 21 is an affidavit from West Cornwall Township Secretary Deborah A. Dahl, posting of the notice of this hearing on the door leading to the township building. Exhibit number 22 is a copy of the proof of publication of the first hearing in this matter on December 11th, 2014. Exhibit 23 is a copy of the proof of publication of the notice of hearing in the Daily News for the hearing held on February 5, 2015. Exhibit number 24 is a copy of a letter I forwarded to the zoning hearing board members relative to this hearing. Exhibit number 25 is a copy of a letter I forwarded to Jonathan D. Andrews, J. Dwight Yoder, and Anthony J. Fitzgibbons Esquires, enclosing a copy of the notice of this hearing. Exhibit number 26 is a letter dated April 2nd, 2015 from Jonathan D. Andrews Esquire, who represents Sunoco Pipeline LP, in which they surrendered the permits initially issued back last year for the property in question. The procedure for tonight, if anybody can't hear me, raise your hand. As the son of a preacher, I was always taught to project to the back. The procedure tonight, we're going to hear some legal arguments from counsel, and then the hearing, Mr. Yoder represents the petitioners, Mr. Andrews represents Sunoco. I'd like to remind the audience, including the chairman, to turn off all cell phones, other electronic devices. Also remind the audience we are to conduct ourselves respectfully, as if we were in church, a synagogue, or a mosque. Any interruptions by the audience will not be permitted, and if it happens, they'll be asked to leave. I'd ask everybody to remove all of their hats. At the conclusion of any testimony, the members of the audience will have a chance to express their views to the board as follows. The first set of speakers will be residents of West Cornwall Township only, and they will come to the front of the room, be sworn, give their name, address, and the township in which they reside. Each person will be limited to 2 minutes. Subsequent speakers are asked not to be repetitive regarding previous comments to the board. If they become repetitive, the board will move on to the next member of the audience. After all residents of West Cornwall Township have had the opportunity to speak before the board will recognize non-West Cornwall Township residents who will be limited to 1 minute, and again will state their name, address, and municipality in which they reside, and we ask that they also not be repetitive. It is recognized that many issues have been raised by the appellants. The board and I have had the opportunity to review all the pleadings, including the decision and order of the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission dated October 2nd, 2014, regarding the status of Sunoco as a public utility. Public utility, PUC found Sunoco is a public utility. As a public utility, the only zoning issues to be considered by the zoning hearing board tonight will be the 2 buildings in question. Sunoco decided not to appeal the issue as to whether or not those buildings were exempt from zoning. As a result, then, that matter is back before the zoning hearing board. In my review of the pleadings, there are only two buildings in question as follows. One is an enclosed 14-foot by 14-foot by 52-foot power distribution center, and a 35 by 50-foot pump equipment enclosure. I informed council prior to the December 2015 issue. I have expressed the opinion to the board. Testimony will be limited to these two buildings. What equipment is within the building as it pertains to the public utility or the pipeline itself or the use of the pipeline is not within the purview of the zoning hearing board to decide. I have communicated with council to present argument this evening regarding Sunoco's surrendering the permits previously issued, and I've been informed that the Lebanon County Planning Department has refused to accept these permits. As to whether or not this hearing would be moot and whether or not we should move forward or not, after we hear arguments from council, the board will make at least an initial decision as to whether or not this matter will move forward. If the board takes testimony, we will conclude testimony and any public comment at 10 o'clock p.m. If there is any additional testimony that needs to be presented or comments, we will continue this hearing until a later date, and this hearing shall not be considered the last hearing regarding this particular matter. So at this time, I'd like to turn the matter over to counsel for the parties to at least present the arguments to the board, at least on the issue as to whether or not this surrendering of the permits by Sunoco renders hearing moot. And in light of the fact the Lebanon County Planning Department has refused to accept the surrender of the permits, whether or not then that necessitates us moving forward with the hearing tonight. I'll start with Mr. Yoder first, and we'll move to Mr. Henry.
All right, well, thank you. Good evening, members of the board. My name is Dwight Yoder. I'm here on behalf of the petitioners. I'd like to just address one or two things that Mr. Kilgore mentioned in his opening explanation of the hearing and the scope thereof. First of all, I'm going to object to the zoning board essentially limiting the applicants or the appellants here to the issues based on Mr. Kilgore's determination that Sunoco has established that they are a public utility. The order that Mr. Kilgore referenced was a preliminary order in a proceeding that actually remanded that issue back to a judge to decide. And if we get into testimony, we'll explain the procedural history. The reason that's important is the PUC has never determined definitively in a decision that Sunoco's proposed repurposing of the Mariner East pipeline Sunoco constitutes a public utility for that, and that that's a public utility service. The Public Utility Commission reversed what we call preliminary objections that were granted, but remanded, and the case is very clear, the PUC did not make a final decision on the merits. And what was supposed to be decided was the very issue that this board has apparently already decided. So I object to limiting the scope of the appeal to just the buildings. Related to that, zoning looks not just at structures, but it looks at how things are used. Zoning is about use of land, use of building. So you could have a building that has a gas station, that's one use. You could have a building, the same building, that has a barn, that's a different use. And so what is before, the application that was before the county dealt with a zoning permit seeking approval for a type of structure and a use. While we're not here to determine whether the pump inside there has certain specifications or meets certain standards, how the building is used is critical to the permits that were issued. Now, turning to Sunoco's attempted surrender. The different positions that Sunoco has taken in the last year can give somebody whiplash. It is really unbelievable. If you recall, they first came and they requested that they needed these permits. Sunoco requested that they needed these permits. They filled out an application, provided it to county planning. County planning issued those permits. We contend that there should have been a few more steps in the process. That's why we're here, that those permits were improperly issued. And all we're asking is that Sunoco play by the same rules that everybody else plays by. However, prior to coming to the county, Sunoco had made a request to the Public Utility Commission saying they're exempt from zoning. And they petitioned the PUC to make this determination. And so, on the one hand, they said, we're exempt, on the other hand said, give us the permits. If you recall, back in December, we were here, and if I recall, Council for Sunoco said, well, we really didn't need the permits. We just did it as a matter of courtesy. We think we're exempt, and we think the PUC is going to say we're exempt. And Mr. Kilgore recommended, and the board agreed that we should stay. We should not proceed with our appeal because the PUC was going to decide whether, in fact, they were exempt from local municipal zoning. Right? So that's where we were at in December. We wanted to proceed. Now, in March, just last month, lo and behold, Sunoco goes back to the PUC and says, nope, we're going to withdraw our request that we're exempt. We're actually going to now comply with the local requirements, the local zoning requirements. So after that whole process, they come back and they say, we're withdrawing our petition to the PUC, and now we're going to comply with the local requirements. 3 or 4 days ago, we get a letter that says, the permits that we got, that we said we didn't need, but now we say we do need, we're going to surrender. All right, and that was the last I heard until this evening. The county has apparently taken the position they can't surrender it. And frankly, that makes sense. They built the buildings. The buildings are there, okay? And we may hear tonight whether there's any use going on there, but the buildings are there. And you will see pictures of these buildings. They are clearly designed and being used as an integral part of repurposing this pipeline. So, frankly, whether the permits are surrendered or not, the issues are not moot. The issues remain, which is, did Sunoco follow the correct procedures to get the permits? Did they meet the requirements of the zoning ordinance? This board is charged with enforcing the requirements of the zoning ordinance. And had this been any other entity, would the requirements have been different? And we plan to show that yes. In fact, you'll look at the ordinance and there's no question that the uses in the manufacturing district require that they go through a conditional use process, which is a separate hearing in front of the supervisors, that they meet certain performance standards and requirements, that they have all their permits from other regulatory agencies in place, and that, importantly, there be a hearing where the public can participate and ask questions. And I think all this weaving and bobbing has essentially been about trying to avoid that very issue, which is we don't want to have folks asking us questions about what's happening here, because when you dig into this, there are a lot of concerns about taking a 1930 pipeline and reusing it for something very different than it was ever intended for. So, having said all that, our position is it's not moot. We're prepared to proceed, and we think this board should hear the appeal. Thanks.
Thank you. Andrews?
Good evening, gentlemen. My name is Jonathan Andrews, McNeese Wallace and Nerd, 100 Pine Street, Harrisburg, PA 17108. Whiplash is when you ask for permits to be revoked and the permittee gives up those permits and you change your mind and say, no, those permits have to stay, we want to talk about it in a public setting. This is about mootness. Mootness means when there's been a change in law or a change in facts during the pendency of an appeal that impact whether there actually exists a case or controversy and make that controversy go away, the whole appeal has to be dismissed. The single basis of this appeal was that the permit should be revoked. That's the relief that was requested by the appellants. What Sunoco has done is forfeited those permits. We said all along we didn't think we needed the permits for everything that's out there. We've said that from the beginning. And when Mr. Yoder suggests that we went ahead and requested the permits, that's not the full story. We only went for the permits after one of his clients repeatedly went into the county suggesting that we needed permits. So we went ahead to get along, went ahead to get along, we sought the permits. Despite the fact that we're a public utility corporation and don't need the permits for the non-voting facilities. You were gracious enough to stay the proceeding while we had our petition pending before the PUC. I understand that that added some confusion by the fact that we've withdrawn that petition. That doesn't mean that we're saying we're not a public utility. It doesn't mean anything like that. It just means we're not putting the subject matter of the buildings in front of the PUC. We're saying they are subject to municipal regulation to the extent R2 enclosures are built. But at the end of the day, what's been asked for are permits to be revoked. We have surrendered them. And that was only half of the letter that was issued last week. I'm not sure if you had a chance to read it. The other half was that we will be immediately filing for new permits for the buildings to clarify the record here. We went into the county today seeking those new permits and have started that process. So this is not a bob and weave. This is an effort to clarify the record, since there seems to be a whole lot of confusion in terms of what a public utility is entitled to, what they're exempt from, why we got permits, why we forfeited permits. What all it boils down to is when an appeal asks for permits to be revoked and the permits don't exist anymore because they've been forfeited, what are you to do? What you would end up issuing tonight would be an advisory opinion, which you can't do. There is no longer a controversy before you because those permits have been revoked and the matter is moot.
Do you have any comments to that? And I have a question.
Well, the permits have not, apparently haven't been revoked because the county has not agreed to revoke them. So the argument may have some legs if in fact the permits were revoked, but they're not revoked. That's a problem.
If you seek a building permit and choose not to build and you give up the permit, it disappears. It's not as though the county can force a hearing to occur tonight, for whatever reason it may be wanting to have a hearing, and say, no, you can't give up your permits. Permits are property rights. They belong to Sunoco. We have a right to defend them, and we have a right to give them up, and that's what we've done. But bear in mind, we are applying for new permits. We're not just pretending like this situation's disappearing or that the pump station doesn't exist. We are getting the right permits for those two enclosures.
Let me ask you a question, Mr. Andrews. Mr. Yoder said that the Public Utility Commission has not found you to be a public utility, and therefore we still need to go through and hear issues regarding zoning. If you could address that.
I think that's a mischaracterization of the PUC's October 2nd order. What the PUC stated after a lengthy discussion about the history of Sunoco's public utility certificates and the certificated service of the Mariner East Line, it said there is a rebuttable presumption that Sunoco Pipeline LP is a public utility. And on remand to the administrative law judge, they sent it back down to the administrative law judge, which is like a gatekeeper before it comes back up to the PUC. They said, while you are considering whether the buildings should be exempt from zoning, you can hear testimony from opponents in an attempt to rebut the presumption that Sunoco Pipeline is a public utility.
Mr. Andrews, the buildings are built, is that correct?
That's correct.
So, explain, if you would, how you can return the permits for buildings you already built.
By seeking the new ones immediately to fill that gap. Otherwise, an enforcement notice would need to be issued by the county for the buildings that exist without a permit.
Well, they had a permit,
We did, it's been surrendered.
so you can reapply for a new permit.
Yes. And in fact, that's what's been sought all along by the appellants. You heard Mr. Yoder.
Right.
We want them to go through the right process. But we're trying to meet that request.
I'll ask Mr. Someone here from county, so wasn't the right process followed? Is that what I'm hearing?
Originally,
Yes.
the right process was followed, in our opinion, the county's opinion. They applied, someone from Sunoco did come in. The original permit was for a concrete pad. When that permit was issued, there was questions regarding the concrete pad. There was discussions with our executive director, Bob Sense, and at that time it was determined that we would issue zoning permits for buildings and anything that was approved by the land development plan, West Cornwall Township supervisors that they approved to the public meetings and the process that a land development plan has to go through. So we issued a permit for the entire property. And they received the permits, they got the inspections done by Commonwealth Code, our third-party inspection service.
Stop, excuse, I'm a little slow on this, so you have to bear with me. So you issued permits for the entire property. How about the two buildings we're talking about? Were permits issued for those?
Correct. Everything, all buildings and structures that were approved on the land development plan were permitted for Sunoco.
So there wasn't anything inappropriate about it,
No,
in your estimation?
in our opinion.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else you gentlemen want to call our attention? We're going to take a short recess and we're going to discuss where we go from here.
If I could just add, the section of the municipalities planning code that deals with the public utility exemption is called section 619. And there's essentially a two-part process that has to be met. And it's the burden of the entity that's seeking that exemption to prove that. The first is whether it's a public utility corporation. Okay, so the entity has to first establish that. And then the second is whether the building in question is reasonably necessary for the convenience or welfare of the public. So getting back to the issue of the scope of these proceedings, Sunoco had an opportunity to establish that before the PUC. They filed a petition. They voluntarily withdrew that petition before there was a finding on those 2 points. So the PUC's intermediate kind of decision regarding whether they were a public utility has no relevance. They withdrew from that process. That is not binding, and I submit that absent Sunoco being able to establish that they're a public utility, that they come before this board and before the township as anybody else. And therefore, the zoning and hearing board should not limit their inquiry just to the building. Even if they do limit it just to the building, we submit, with all due respect to the county, that there were processes that were not followed correctly.
Anything else you wish to say, Mr.
No, the PUC's order of October 2nd speaks for itself.
Let me ask a devil's advocate question. Let's assume for a moment the board says, okay, the permits for these structures, and in my opinion, that's what we're limited to tonight, were not issued properly. So we say that, what happens after that? Does the township have to enforce the zoning ordinance and require Sunoco to tear these buildings down? Does Sunoco have to apply for new permits? Or are we just wasting time, money, and energy arguing over these issues?
It'd be either or of those situations. The zoning hearing board can't enforce the ordinance. It can revoke permits, but it can't do anything beyond
I
that.
understand. We can't
So-
make it tear the buildings down.
Right,
I
so if you
understand.
say the permits were bad, We have to either get the right permits or take the walls and roofs off the enclosures.
Sure.
Here's where I think there is, I think that's a good question. We don't want to just be spinning our wheels here and not get to somewhere where we move the process forward. Here's where I think the zoning board is critical, which is making a determination of what is the correct process. In other words, we'll be right back here in a month or two, because what's going to happen is Sunoco is going to file a permit application for exactly what they did before. The county presumably is going to issue the same permit without requiring a conditional use hearing and without requiring that the standards are met. And then what happens? We have to appeal the very same permit and come back to this board and do exactly what we're doing here. So what this board, I think, needs to decide is, A, was the process correct in what was, in terms of the permits that were issued? And if you say it was, then you rule against us and the permits are not revoked, or they're surrendered and Sunoco goes forward and requests new permits. If you say, yes, there were some steps missed, then when Sunoco goes for their new permits, they know they have to submit a conditional use application. And I think that's what's critical in terms of where we're going tonight.
Okay, we'll take a short recess and go back.
Okay, thank you for your patience. We're going to resume the zoning hearing board. Mr. Kilgore's.
We've discussed the legal issues, and we'll proceed with testimony as to whether the permits were properly issued, but we're going to, the testimony is limited to the buildings, all right? That's, as far as my opinion is, that's the only issue before this board, all right? Whether or not it's a public utility, or whether or not the old land use is something else for the township to consider, that's not for us to consider.
To be clear, the board is taking the position that despite the surrender of the permits, the appeal is not moot.
The appeal is not moved.
Okay, thank you.
That's correct. Okay. Mr. Joe, you ready to proceed?
I am.
You understand the limitations we have here? I know you don't agree with it, but
I do. I'm not entirely clear when you say the building.
it's not the equipment in the buildings,
But
it's
the-
not the relief valves, it's not the
I
pipeline.
understand, but the building's being used for something,
It is.
right?
That's
And,
correct.
and so I think that's fair game. But in terms of what I hear you saying is you don't want testimony on the pipeline and things like that.
Correct.
That's what.
Or the
so-
equipment, I mean, the equipment is part of, there's a presumption this is a public utility. And this board's not gonna make a decision as to whether or not Sunoco is or is not a public utility. That's not for us to do. That's for the public, that's for the PUC to do.
Again, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but absent a definitive ruling on that, I think this board, the zoning hearing board, has to hear this as if it was not a public utility.
I don't agree with you, Dwight.
Okay, I understand.
Okay,
And-
because we need to know more about between the county
Right.
and the
Yeah,
permits.
we wanna know what happened with the permits.
What happened with the
Okay.
permits?
So we'll focus on the permits, and I think I've made the objection for the record in
Right.
terms of
Yeah.
public utilities,
Thank
so
you.
we'll move forward.
Thank you.
Okay, at this time, the appellants want to call Song Kim as a
Okay,
witness.
we'll set up a chair over there so whoever the witnesses are, the board can see them and the attorneys can see them.
Maybe use it right here.
Well,
Or is that what you like?
John?
Next week.
Chairman one is not as hard as that.
We should have a cushion.
Okay, why don't you move it a little closer this way? And so sometimes you can be soft-spoken, so speak up so everyone can catch.
Where?
You want to raise your right hand? You swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give, the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
You want to state your name and your business address, please?
Song Kim, 400 South 8th Street, Lebanon County Planning Department.
Okay, have a seat.
Good evening, Mr. Q. My name is Dwight Yoder, and as you know, I am the attorney here for the appellants.
Yes.
Could you just explain to me how long you have served in your role at the county?
11 years, sir.
All right? And through that time, have you always been assigned to West Cornwall Township?
Yes, sir.
Okay. In those 11 years, other than the permits that are before the zoning hearing board, had you ever received any other permits for this site?
For the Sunoco, no, sir.
Okay.
Can you hear you?
Are
Tony,
you
you're gonna have to speak up.
Okay, sorry.
are you aware?
I don't care if anybody else cannot hear you, she has to hear you.
Yes, sir.
Sir, were you the individual that would have received and processed the permits that Sunoco submitted as it relates to the matters before the zoning hearing board?
No, sir.
Okay, who would have received those?
Luis Rodriguez.
Okay, and what's Mr. Rodriguez's position?
He's no longer employed with Lebanon County.
Okay. And in his position when he was employed with Lebanon County, what did he do?
He issued permits for the, at the time, 15 municipalities that we enforced zoning for.
And so he would have been the person who received it for West Cornwall Township.
He would have did the enforcement for West Cornwall Township, yes, sir.
In terms of receiving and processing the permit applications, would Mr. Rodriguez have handled that as well?
Yes, sir. For this project, yes, sir.
All right? Did anybody else from the county handle that?
Actual issuing of the permit,
Processing it, reviewing it, and then issuing it, any of those things?
reviewing, no. Processing, there was help at a later point in time when it got a little bit dicey with different parties involved. So, Bob Sent, the executive director, and myself, we did help Lewis determine what could be issued and what was not to be issued.
So you had firsthand involvement with what could be issued and what couldn't be issued?
Firsthand, no, sir.
All right, you just said that you helped Mr. Rodriguez,
I
you
was,
and Mr.
I was
Sent.
pulled in after everyone started making their comments. This shouldn't have been issued, should have been issued. Mrs. Pam Bishop actually had discussion with Bob Sens, our executive director, and at that time, I got pulled in, and this is midway through the process, right?
Midway through the process, though, you became familiar with the permits that had been issued and what had been done, correct?
Correct.
And I think you said kind of in the opening that in your opinion, those permits you felt were issued properly, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so you had enough education on the permits that were issued that you could come to that opinion, correct?
The two for Sunoco?
Well, there were more than two, you mean the two zoning permits?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay.
We only do the zoning permits for this project. Commonwealth Code Inspection Service did the issuing of the occupancy permits for the basically commercial property.
All right. Mr. Kilgore, I have extra copies of our application, which include the exhibits, the permits as exhibits. I can mark that unless that has already been made part of the record.
Exhibits 1 and 2 were your initial application and your amended application.
Okay, so I'm going to refer to Exhibit 2. I have an extra copy for the witness, and if any of the board members, since it's so kind of bulky, I only made 3 extra copies. So this will be referred to as Exhibit 2. Mr. Kim, I've handed you what was previously marked as Exhibit 2, and that is a document that is the appellant's amended application for appeal to the zoning hearing board. And if you see, there are a number of exhibits attached as Exhibit A, B, C, D, and E. And I'm gonna have you turn to, first of all, Exhibit A. And would you agree that there's a cover letter there dated April 9th, 2014 from a representative of Sunoco in which they submitted a land development plan, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And is it your understanding that the land development plan, there is a sketch kind of at the back of Exhibit A that looks, and for the record, I'm holding up, it looks like a site plan,
Yes, sir.
right? And before you testified that Sunoco had submitted a land development plan that had been processed and approved, is that correct?
Correct.
And is this that land development plan?
I'm not sure, Bob Sense would have been the one that handled the land development portion of the application.
Right? If you look at the exhibit that shows the site plan, Exhibit A, can you identify if this depicts the additional buildings that were to be constructed by Sunoco?
Two projects?
The two additional buildings, I think one is a pump station building, and the other one was an equipment building.
This building here,
And just, yeah, for the record, okay.
this building here,
Okay,
and
so,
then this building here.
for the record, why don't you take this highlighter and just mark on your exhibit those two buildings?
I have
Oh, do you
a
have,
large copy of the plan, if you would like to mark that as an exhibit.
that would be great.
Don't know if any of my scribblings are on here or not.
I may have an actual full set as well.
If you have a full set, why don't we use that?
I didn't review the plan, I wasn't the one that
Start with whatever the last.
Are you gonna just get a sequence?
So it'll be 27?
27. Do you have any stickers, Ken? I know.
Yeah, that'll mark it first, okay, and then I'll.
Hey, Mr. Kim, I've marked Exhibit 27, which is a larger set of the same land development plans that were attached to our application. And with the board's indulgence, I'll set it here and open it to the plan we were looking at. And if you want to, now with the yellow highlighter, you can mark the two buildings.
And there was a contract tag, and I don't know where the other one was.
Okay. Does that help you at all?
This helps, right?
Yeah, that's the block one was approved. It was, this building here. And then putting slab, yeah, then it was this. 'Cause the original permit was for a slab, where they put the pumps on, and then they erected this building over top of this slab.
So the land development plan shows a slab, but not necessarily the building.
No, it shows an enclosure here, so I would say it's this.
Okay.
So this enclosure here, and this power distribution center here, so these two structures.
Right.
Put them in slab figure right here.
Just show the
And those were approved. And those were approved by Rodriguez or Sense
The actual permit,
No.
this land development plan,
Yes.
that was approved by West Cornwall Township supervisors and with our,
With this on,
if that's the plan that was submitted as the final plan and recorded, yes, that would be.
then permits were submitted for these two buildings.
There were two permits issued. The first permit was for the concrete pad. The second permit was, again, there was a debate between public utility.
Oh, go ahead. Was there a permit issued for, on top of that slab where it says enclosed?
The permit was issued for the entire project as per land development plan.
So that slab says enclosure, and that was approved.
Correct.
All right, Mr. Kim, let me direct your attention now to Exhibit B of Exhibit 2, which is our amended application. And at the top, it says zoning permit, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you were just responding to one of the zoning board members' questions about whether there was a zoning permit issued. Is this the zoning permit that was issued for the concrete slab?
Yes, sir.
Right? And if you look at the top, would that have been completed by Sunoco? The top part of this application,
The application, the permit is actually completed by Luis Rodriguez.
all right? And does the Sunoco then sign what the application, once it's completed by Mr. Rodriguez?
H.T. Sweeney representative David Byers signed this permit as a contractor. So if you want to say Sunoco, I'm not really sure. He was a contractor.
So he was a contractor for Sunoco that submitted this application?
Yes.
Okay. And if you look at what this provides, it only allows for the concrete slab, correct?
This actual permit, yes, sir.
And did in fact Sunoco build their buildings on the concrete slab before they got the next permit?
I'm not sure, to be honest with you. I know that there was discussions with our executive director, and at that time I was directed to have Louis contact Mr. David Byers to come and get permits issued for any other project that they may want to do as per land development plan, and that's basically what happened.
So you don't know if in fact they began building before they had their permit to build?
I was told by our director, and I was part of a conversation with Pam, that there was construction being done. Construction being done meant they were moving dirt, they were putting up these stacks, pumps, valves, but to actually say the building, we actually called our third-party agency, Commonwealth Code Inspection Service, and sent them out to the site. And our BCO, Robert Meese, was involved at that time to make sure that if there was, that they wanted to make sure all the required permits were issued.
All right. When you look at this permit, in the middle part of it, it says proposed use. It says concrete pad for equipment, correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. Now, I'm going to have you flip to Exhibit C. And this was a permit issued July 31st, 2014. And this would have been issued by your third-party.
Commonwealth Code Inspection Service.
Okay. This is a building permit, and what was this for?
I can't tell you, it's not my permit. Once we issue the zoning permit, and it goes to, everything gets transferred to Commonwealth, and then they have the authority or to approve or disapprove what Sunoco was asking for.
Right. Let me direct your attention to Exhibit D. And at the top, this is similar to the other zoning permit, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you said, I think on numerous occasions now, that a zoning permit was issued by the county for the entire site,
For all structures.
all buildings and structures.
As per land development plan.
Okay. And if I look at Exhibit D, it's actually Exhibit 2D, is that the permit that was issued for all the structures on the land development plan?
Permit 914?
Yes,
Yes, sir.
right? And when it says the proposed use, it says processing structures, correct?
Yes, sir.
And is that in fact how the county viewed what was being proposed?
Present use, item number 8, present uses and structures, we determined that that's what the existing use was.
Okay, so, but I'm looking at the proposed use. So these new structures, the additional structures that were being constructed, that it was, you referred to it as process, not you, the county in this form said processing structures, is that
Yes, sir.
correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, under the remarks section, I'm going to just read this so the members of the audience know what we're talking about. It says, "This permit is issued for all projects, buildings, concrete pads, and all accessory structures, including equipment, permitted for any use not otherwise prohibited by law of a manufacturing, fabricating, processing, compounding, or treatment nature that were approved on July 22nd, 2014 for Cornwall Pump Station Tetra Tech Land Development Plan. All work will be done in accordance with the approved land development plan on file with Lebanon Recorder of Deeds." And then it goes on to have another sentence. Did I read that correctly?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And does that accurately reflect the scope of this permit?
I would say yes, sir.
Okay. When you, do you have a copy of the zoning ordinance with you?
I do not, sir.
All right. Mr. Kilgore, I'm not sure if this is necessary, but I have excerpts that I thought I would just mark for the convenience of the board, if that's okay.
That's fine.
You need 20?
Let me just see if I have it up here. I think I have it right. All right, Mr. Kim, I handed you what's been marked Exhibit 28. And I'll just represent to you that I copied certain portions of the West Cornwall Township zoning ordinance to go over. And I'm going to have you actually turn to the third page. And it says the manufacturing district.
Yes, sir.
Is the subject site of tonight's hearing located in the manufacturing district?
Yes, sir.
Right? And the manufacturing district has uses that are permitted in that district, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Are any of those uses permitted by right?
No.
Are they all permitted only by conditional use?
Based on what I'm looking at, yes, sir.
All right? And if you look at the first conditional use, and I'll just direct your attention, it's section 27-1502A. It says, "Any use not otherwise prohibited by law of a manufacturing, fabricating, processing, compounding, or treatment nature," correct?
Yes, sir.
So the zoning permit that was issued was based on this type of use, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you would agree that at no point did Sunoco request or obtain conditional use approval?
They did not.
Okay. Let me direct your attention to the next page, 27-1503. That's section 27-1503. And there's a section there that's highlighted. It says, "No use and or activity shall be established, expanded, reconstructed, or relocated in the manufacturing district unless and until certification is provided to the zoning officer demonstrating compliance to the performance standards of this section. Certification shall consist of approvals through state or federal permitting authorities, reports, or analysis, engineers, or other acceptable sources." Other than this permit that was submitted, this application permit, what other material did Sunoco provide to the county to show they had met the performance standards?
They submitted a land development plan that was approved.
Right? Anything else?
No, sir.
Did they submit an air quality permit from DEP?
No, sir.
Did they submit any other permit?
No, sir.
Did they submit anything about noise related to these buildings?
To myself, no, sir.
To the county?
I'm not sure.
But you're not aware of anything?
I'm not aware of anything.
Are you familiar with the requirements in the West Cornwall Township zoning ordinance for conditional use?
Yes, sir.
Right? And Section 27-2210, and I don't have this copied for you, deals with conditional uses and procedures relating thereto. And I'll just show this for you to just refresh your recollection.
What was that section again?
27. I'm not going to ask you detailed questions, I'm just kind of directing you. You would agree, sir, that Sunoco did not follow any of those procedures before they were issued the zoning permit?
They did not ask for conditional use.
Okay, so they never asked for conditional use?
Correct. Correct.
Okay. And you would agree that the use that was proposed is only permitted by conditional use, correct?
I would not agree. I would agree if it was a vacant lot, and they wanted to establish a pump station use or any other use that, but conditional would have to go through the supervisors. But Lebanon County determined that it's an existing use. They didn't have to meet these conditional uses. If you have a single-family dwelling, because now it's in zoning ordinance as permitted use, I mean, conditional use, you don't have to apply for conditional use if you already have a dwelling.
So is it your position that because there was existing pipeline-related activities there, that they didn't need conditional use approval?
It was Lebanon County's opinion, yes.
Okay. Has Sunoco ever obtained conditional use approval ever for this site?
Not that I'm aware of, sir.
And would you agree that the pipeline was in existence somewhere around 1930? If you know.
I would say so. Yes, I would agree.
Okay. So it's been there a long time,
It has, sir.
and it predates the zoning ordinance,
Yes,
correct?
sir.
Okay. Is it your position if you have an existing approved conditional use and a property owner goes to expand that conditional use? Let's say it's a manufacturing facility and they want to add a new line, that they do not have to go through conditional use approval. Is that your position?
That is the county's position, yes, sir.
Is that your position?
That is the county's position.
So you follow the county's position?
I follow what the guidelines and procedures that are set. I follow, yes, sir.
Why would the county not allow Sunoco to surrender their permit?
Well, I met with Attorney Andrews today. I met with Robert Sands, our executive director. He believed that because of the buildings that are currently at the site, there's no need to surrender now. With that being said, he did state that if certain decision was made tonight at the hearing and the permits were revoked, yes, Sunoco could actually apply immediately for a zoning permit for the same two structures as long as they met the zoning ordinance. We felt that they weren't issued in error. We feel that.
I pre-marked these, but if we just go 29, I'll just refer to them as sub-exhibits.
Is that okay?
Yeah, this was the original, but it's
Okay.
Marked on the original says 29 through 33, and then the marked individually.
So just for the record, I have handed to the court reporter an exhibit that actually contains 5 exhibits. The first one starts at exhibit 29. For those of you who have copies, I have pre-marked them as A1. So just so we're clear, 29 is the first one, and then it runs through 33. I'm actually going to direct your attention to this exhibit 30, the second one in the packet. Okay. And are you familiar with that picture? Do you know what that's looking at?
Some type of maintenance shed at the front of the property.
Okay. If I would tell you that this is the pump station building, would that refresh your recollection? Have you seen this building?
Is this building located at the main road?
At the back.
No, I have not seen this building.
You have not seen this building, so you're not familiar with this building. Let me ask you this, have you seen either of the 2 buildings that they constructed?
No, that's not required by myself.
So you've never gone out to see how they're being used or what the use would be of the building?
That would be Commonwealth Code Inspection Service to issue their certificate of occupancy. So if it meet their requirements, then basically they have final say.
So the zoning permit is basically issued on whatever's on that application form, and then Commonwealth Code goes out and looks at the building code to be sure it's constructed correctly, and after that, they get their building permit.
Yes, sir.
If you look at the next exhibit 31, are you familiar with anything on that picture?
No, sir.
Okay. One second here. Do you know if Mr. Rodriguez would have gone to the site to inspect any of the building?
No, sir.
He would not, or you don't know?
I don't know.
Okay. Do you know if anybody from your office, from the Lebanon County Planning Department, would have inspected?
We're not required to within Commonwealth Code Inspection Service.
I understand that wasn't my question. Do you know if anybody actually went out?
I'm not sure. I do not know.
Did Mr. Sents ever go out?
I'm not sure. I do not know.
Other than your recent meeting with Mr. Andrews regarding surrendering the permit, since this application or this appeal has been filed with the zoning hearing board, have you met with any other representatives of Sunoco or their council?
No, sir.
Those are all the questions that I have.
Mr. Andrews?
Sunoco's position of this appeal is moot, and as such, I'm not going to do anything inconsistent with that, such as ask witnesses questions or make argument.
Board have any questions of Mr. Kim?
Yeah, Mr. Kim, so the group that you hired, did they go out and visit this property?
Commonwealth Code, yes, it is, sir.
And did you receive any information from them about everything in compliance with what was issued?
It's not protocol. We don't need to verify that
Why do they go out and visit?
because it's a state requirement
Requirement to do what?
to issue their permit and to give them certificate of occupancy to allow them to use the facility as they requested.
But they're looking at a facility that's been permitted. So aren't they looking at?
Well, our permit is based off setbacks,
Right.
permitted,
Right.
we determined to be permitted.
Right.
But the construction portion of it, and if it met construction code, that's
Right.
Commonwealth Code.
So they didn't say anything to you about the buildings not being appropriate or built right or?
They issued the certificate of occupancy, so.
And did you at the county office, in your discussions, did you have anything, you talked about our zoning ordinance, did you see anything that was out of compliance? Obviously, you didn't think it needed conditional use.
At that time, no, sir.
I think. That's my questions. Any questions?
I believe that certificate of occupancy is one of your exhibits, is it not?
It is.
And that would be in Exhibit 2, would it be D or E?
I think it's E. Oh, no, that's the building permit. I think it's actually 1, which was the supplemental.
Exhibit 1?
Yes.
I thought I saw something.
I
Anybody
could
have
just-
any questions as a result of the board's questions?
I do. I just have one follow-up. Mr. Kim, you testified earlier, though, that when you issued the zoning permit,
I did not issue the zoning permit.
when the county issued the zoning permit, fair enough. Wait a second. You just answered the question that you didn't find anything objectionable, right?
He asked me if I looked at that zoning ordinance, is there anything objectionable regarding that zoning ordinance? I look at the West Cornwall zoning ordinance all the time.
All right, I'm just trying to clarify your answer. You did not issue the zoning
I did not issue the
permit,
zoning permit.
so you didn't make the determination.
I'm here on behalf of the county because we need to represent the county. I know what happened based off conversation with Mrs. Bishop, Robert Sents, Louis Rodriguez. Louis Rodriguez is no longer employed with Lebanon County, so unfortunately he could not be here. 2 permits were issued by Louis Rodriguez when he was a current zoning officer. He was told by our executive director in meetings that there was discussions, and this is what the county determined to be true, and he was told to issue the permits.
All right, I have another question.
All right. Thank you, son.
Okay, the next witness will be Pam Bishop.
Mr. Bishop, you want to come forward? Now raise your right hand. Swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give, whole truth, nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Good evening, Ms. Bishop. Could you state your name for the record?
Pamela Bishop?
And you're one of the individuals who's filed the appeal, is that correct?
Yes.
And you also are related to the citizens group that filed the appeal, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you're familiar with the permits, and you heard the testimony of Mr. Kim, correct?
Yes.
Did you have occasion when Sunoco requested the permits to determine whether Sunoco constructed the pump station building before they had approval to do so?
Yes.
Okay, and can you describe for the board how you came upon that information?
I had been,
Pam, could you
Talk-
speak up a little bit,
thank
please?
you. I had been in conversations with Mr. Kim and Mr. Sense at the county planning office about the permits. My recollection is I had met a neighbor who lived nearby the pump station the night of September 15 at a meeting, and he had told me that they were constructing the night of the 15th of September. I went out on Tuesday the 16th, and from the Starner Road side, I could see that there was construction of buildings going on that site. And I went into, I had a camera on my cell phone, and I sent Mr. Sense a picture of the construction that I had seen, and went in to talk to him, and I believe Mr. Kim was there that day. Maybe it was Mr. Rodriguez also, on the 16th, and I said, it looks like they're constructing without permits. I think it was Mr. Kim that told me someone was out on Friday the 12th, and he had, and I don't know who that was.
Andy Nelson,
Thank you.
Commonwealth Code.
Commonwealth Code
Inspector.
Inspection Officer. Someone had gone out on behalf of the county and inspected on the previous Friday, the 12th of September. And they told me that, yes, they knew they were constructing without the permits being issued yet. However, they had asked Sunoco to come in and apply. And that upset me because I think it was Mr. Kim again, who had said there had been a cease and desist order. I remember him showing me a cease and desist order, but they had not issued it because they had invited Sunoco to come in and get the proper application filled out of the permit. I think that Mr. Kim also explained to me that because the county handles the residential construction, that if it had been a residential construction, they would have issued a cease and desist order. But because Commonwealth Code does the non-residential structures for the county planning department, that they had chosen not to, or something along those lines. That's my recollection. And then I was called by Mr. Kim, I think, or maybe it was Mr. Rodriguez, on a couple days later, who explained to me that the zoning permit had been issued, that the Sunoco had come in, signed the application, and the zoning permit had been issued. It's a one-page, I think you've seen this document. And that had been issued September 17, the day after I had shown them the pictures of the construction going on without permits. That permit issued on the 17th had language in it, and pointed it out to me, that they, Sunoco was directed not to construct without the, that the zoning permit required that they get a construction permit from Commonwealth Code Inspection Service before they constructed. That permit was issued, and I think it's in the file, on September 30. So my concern was that the company showed a disrespect of the zoning ordinance and the Office of Lebanon County Planning Department by going forward with construction without the appropriate permits in place. And yes, I did complain to the office about that.
Ms. Bishop, let me direct your attention to what's been previously marked as Exhibit 30, which was in the packet, and it shows the building. Did you take this picture?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And do you know about when you took that picture?
I believe I took it in October,
Right.
after the construction was complete.
And do you know what this picture reflects?
I believe that that is the, it's a big, there was a big metal superstructure, and then there was this prefabricated building put down. There's another picture, you don't have it, with a big crane to put that structure over what I think is the pump station. And the picture was taken from behind the site, not along Route 322, the site fronts Route 322.
Look at this site plan, and maybe you can, for the board, show which...
Can you refer to it, which exhibit that is?
Yes, this is Exhibit 27, second page.
322. So you're talking, you're taking it from over
I
here.
was over here.
Okay.
When you say over here, you are,
South.
is this...
South. There should be.
Yeah, so on the south side of the property,
Yes.
do you want to just put an X where you were approximately at when you took this picture? Just approximately.
Explain to you that I was on Mr. Weaver's property. Mr. Weaver had given my husband and myself permission to go on the property to inspect the site because I couldn't see it well enough from Starling Road. Mr. Weaver owns the field.
So you were on the
It
neighboring,
surrounds.
you were on the neighboring property, you went up to the property line and
Yeah,
took the
you can
picture,
see, I took it through the fence.
okay?
So
And
it's
when-
probably over here.
So you took a picture of the building that, the pump station building, and that is the 35 by 50 pump enclosure on this plan,
Yes.
right? Now just stand here a second, I'm gonna have you look at Exhibit 31, which is another picture. Okay, and can you describe what that is?
On the right side of the picture is the, what they call an enclosed vapor flare stack, which according to the drawings is 34 feet high. But they need to vent the gas so that it's not explosive in the pipeline. It's part of the pump station, pumps the gas through the pipeline. The flare stack is a release of gas that might build up and be dangerous, so it's necessary to have it. And I think, I'm not positive, but I think that there's a building over in this part of the site.
And you're
There is-
referring to kind of the left side of the picture.
That is this power station. I think it was a prefab building.
So that's the second building
I believe
that
so.
was referred to in prior testimony.
Yeah.
And was this picture 31 taken approximately at the same time as the other picture?
Yes, about mid-October, when the construction was pretty much done.
Ms. Bishop, have you been able to determine whether Sunoco has obtained all of the regulatory approvals and permits that are required for this facility? And let me direct your attention specifically to the air quality permit.
Let me say this, why don't you ask her about the permits, whether they're required or not required is a legal issue, which she's not qualified to answer.
All right, well, let me ask you this. Are you aware of whether Sunoco has an air quality permit?
I am aware that the Department of Environmental Protection has not yet issued the air permit for the Cornwall Pump Station. And essentially what happened is the department put a public notice in the Pennsylvania Bulletin, as they're required to do, of intent to issue the air quality operating permit for this pump station. And there were nigh on 500 requests for public hearing filed with, mine was one of them, with the Department of Environmental Protection asking for a public hearing on that permit. That hearing was granted by the department and held on February 17 of this year. And I'm aware that DEP is reviewing the public comment from that public hearing and has not yet issued the air permit.
And just for the record, I think we did this at the prior hearing, but is the board taking administrative notice of the PUC proceedings and the docket?
Yes.
And I would also ask the same for the DEP docket to the extent it relates to permits related to this site.
Take notes.
Ms. Bishop, I'm going to hand you the exhibits that were previously marked, and I'm going to have you turn to Exhibit 33, which is tab 5. Are you familiar with that exhibit?
I have seen this, yes.
Okay. And this is an important safety message from Sunoco Logistics, correct?
Yes.
And if you look at the second page there, is it your understanding this is a brochure that Sunoco distributes to individuals in the area of their pump station building and pipeline?
Yes, that's how I obtained it from a landowner who had received this from Sunoco.
The pump station building inside of that will have gases that will run through the pump, correct?
Yes, highly volatile natural gas liquids such as butane, propane, and ethane.
And based on Sunoco Logistics' own documentation, could you read what it says about the product related to butane, propane, ethane, propylene, and natural gas liquids? What types of vapors could be released from the building?
Initially heavier than air, spread along ground, may travel to source of ignition and flash back. Product is colorless, tasteless, and odorless.
And are there any health hazards associated with this in Sunoco's own documentation?
In that paragraph, it says, may be ignited by heat, sparks, or flames, may form combustible mixture with air. Vapors may cause dizziness or asphyxiation, may be toxic if inhaled at high concentrations. Contact with gas or liquefied gas may cause burns, severe injury, and or frostbite.
When the county issued the zoning permit, you asked them if they had done any review, correct, of the use of the building and the risks associated, and what was
Yes.
their response?
No review that I know of. I specifically asked for them if they had looked at the noise issue. They said no. I asked them if they had performed any review under section 1503, I think it was, that you talked with Mr. Kim about,
That's correct.
which is the performance standards for the manufacturing district in the West Cornwall Township zoning ordinance. And they had performed none of those. I asked them if they had gotten any certifications, as that section asks for the applicant to submit, and they said no, they had not. In fact, there was some correspondence between the director of the county planning department, Mr. Bob Sense, and a citizen, in which he said he responded to some of those questions. He said he didn't know how to do that review.
Pam, push your voice up.
Okay. And I
So I guess just,
specifically asked about environmental review, and he said there was none. And my concern had always been that the process be followed, that whatever process applied to this application from Sunoco be followed.
Ms. Bishop, in addition to that concern, aren't you concerned that reversing the flow and putting different types of gas through this building that has a pump in it has a lot of unanswered questions?
Absolutely. And in my research, I came across a guidance document issued in September of 2014 in the Federal Register.
Let me direct your attention to Exhibit 32.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know you
It's
had that.
actually
Didn't know you
tab,
had that.
tab number 4.
The pipelines of this sort are regulated by the federal agency under the U.S. Department of Transportation. It's called the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration. And actually, Sunoco is a shipper of hazardous materials. He's not considered a...
Ms. Bishop, let me direct your attention here
Yeah.
to Exhibit 32, which is Exhibit 4 of your...
So, thank you.
And it says summary. Could you just read what the summary is for this bulletin?
PHMSA is issuing this advisory bulletin to alert operators of hazardous liquid and gas transmission pipelines of the potential significant impact flow reversals, product changes, and conversion to service may have on the integrity of a pipeline. Failures on natural gas transmission and hazardous liquid pipelines have occurred after these operational changes. This advisory bulletin describes specific notification requirements, general operating and maintenance, and integrity management actions regarding flow reversal, product changes, and conversion to service. This advisory bulletin also recommends additional actions operators should take when these operational changes are made, including the submission of a comprehensive written plan to the appropriate PHMSA regional office regarding these changes prior to implementation.
Does it then proceed to highlight a number of failures that have occurred when these pipelines have been changed and the flow has been reversed and different types of product has been transported?
Yes, it does. In fact, it recommends that it may not, I think the words, may not be advisable for this pipeline reversal, product change, and conversion of service if the pipeline has had, and there were 5 conditions that they listed where it is not advisable to do this. One of them is if there has been a history of spills. And I am aware of at least 2 spills at that pump station and nearby the pump station in the last 25 years when it was carrying gasoline through the pipeline that we now call the Mariner East 1.
If you look at page 7, you had identified, I think, some bullet points.
Yes.
Is that what you're referring to?
Those are the 5 conditions where they advise not to do flow reversal product changes or conversion of surface under the following conditions, those 5.
And Mr. Kim said he agreed that he thought the pipeline had been constructed in the 1930s. Is that consistent with your understanding?
Yes,
This is an old pipeline.
yes. I would also say that at the November 11, I think, the November meeting of the West Cornwall Township Supervisors, Mr. Don Zalaskowitz from Sunoco spoke to the supervisors and the public who were in attendance at that meeting. And he said that the pump station was discontinued at that site in 2005. Just to add a particular fact from Sunoco's.
So just so I'm clear, what you heard a Sunoco representative tell the supervisor that the pump station had actually been discontinued?
Yes, we have it on film.
Okay. And therefore, that use had ended at that time.
The pump station, I believe that Sunoco may have continued to flow gasoline through
I mean, what's the relevance of
a pipe here.
I can move on.
Pardon?
I can move on.
Okay.
Ms. Bishop, just 1 or 2 more questions. You testified earlier that none of these environmental considerations were reviewed by the county when they issued the zoning permit, correct?
Yes, that's my understanding.
They didn't review any of this information regarding the bulletins related to potential hazards of reusing old pipelines and pump stations and buildings that cover that.
Not to my knowledge. I would say this about the, if I could add to my testimony concerning this important safety message that Sunoco sends to landowners along the pipeline and near the pump station. They expect that the public will be the first line of monitoring for leaks. That's why they warn them about looking for these. If you see frost on the ground.
Well, I think that document speaks for itself. We don't need to read the
Okay, I think you made your point, Ms. Bishop.
Thank you.
We can move on.
Yes.
Ms. Bishop, was there anything else you wanted to add? Those are all the questions that I had for you, but now's your chance to add anything in addition to the board if you'd like.
Just that the citizens' appeal that we filed to the zoning hearing board, the appeal that we filed to the zoning hearing board was motivated so that the public would know about the pump station and pipeline and its potential risk to public health and safety, which I don't believe had been made clear through the process. And I'm very grateful to the board tonight to have let us put on some testimony so that the public can know about Sunoco and their penchant for saying to public agencies such as the County Planning Department or the PUC, whatever would you know, they seem to say, oh, I'm a public utility. Oh, I'm not a public utility, I'm a manufacturing use. Oh, we're safe, but we don't want to have any public hearing. They pulled out of the Public Utility Commission proceeding that they had asked for before there was a public hearing. And that's one of the requirements in Section 619 of the MPC. The MPC says if you want relief from local zoning, you must, after hearing, the PUC must make those findings. There was never a public hearing, there was never findings by the PUC. And it's just a terrible safety and health concern for our first responders who will be coming from this building to respond. And yet Sunoco's response time is from Sinking Spring, which is where if there is a potential for an accident. They can't get here very soon, and our firemen and first responders will be, put in jeopardy, not to mention the homeowners and the landowners. And I just would like everyone to think about that and think about the first purpose of municipal government is to protect public health and safety. And I don't think we have done it properly here. It needs to be reviewed under the zoning ordinance with a chance for the public to speak.
And Ms. Bishop, just to end on that, if there had been a conditional use hearing,
That would have occurred.
that would have occurred,
Yeah.
and there would have been an opportunity for conditions to address some of these concerns and mitigate some of the risks associated with this, correct?
Absolutely.
Those are all the questions.
Mr. Andrews, do you have any questions?
I've stated my position.
Does the board have any questions on this, Ms. Bishop? Thank you, Ms. Bishop.
Thank you.
Can we take a 5-minute break?
Sure. Great. Okay. We're ready to get back at it here.
All right, thank you, members of the board. That's actually the only witnesses we plan on calling this evening. I do have just a few final kind of administrative matters, and would also request that the board allow an opportunity to submit a legal submission within a week or 10 days, depending on how the board proceeds once the hearing is closed. The only exhibit that I didn't refer to in the packet, Exhibit 29, was a timeline that basically documented many of the PUC proceedings. And since the board has taken administrative notice of that, I'm not going to go through that, but that's just essentially a summary of many of the key dates regarding what happened before the PUC, as well as some of the permits that were requested and issued in the matter before the board. I would also ask that the exhibits be admitted into evidence. I'm not sure the ones I presented
I
may
have 27, 28, 29 through 33. Are there any others?
Nope, I think that's it.
Any objections, Mr. Andrews?
Right?
Hearing none, they may be admitted.
Thank you. And I'm not sure how the, I'm assuming Sunoco is not going to put on a case based on their position thus far. I'm not sure if you want any closing or if you'd rather have that in writing. I know, there might be opportunity for public comment at this evening.
Well, you had mentioned something about submitting some type of legal argument to us, which would be afforded to both parties if they so desire. My problem with that is, I would think that this board would need to reconvene after the submission of that document, or documents, which would then be the final hearing regarding that. This would not be the final hearing.
I think you could close the record tonight. We could submit that, and then the board could reconvene to make a decision whether you constitute, it would have to be advertised, whether that constitutes a hearing. I'm not sure matters, as long as,
But we have a 45-day time limit from the close of the hearing. So that if we close the record tonight, I think the timetable runs from tonight. But if we leave the record open, and
gives you another 45 days.
we would reconvene, we would have another hearing, okay? Board would have the opportunity to review that, and they would make a decision at that hearing. And this would not be considered the final hearing.
Yeah, alternatively, I mean, I think if there's no other testimony, that we close the record tonight, but we give you an additional time on the record. And that way, if you leave the record open, you might come back and then people want to continue to present.
All I want to do is avoid the 45-day time limit.
We can easily work with you on that.
So if you're agreed that, no, we're not going to take any additional testimony, but this would not be the last hearing, that we would reconvene after your submission, and that would be the last hearing, and the 45 days would run from that time. Is that agreeable?
That's agreeable, assuming that the next hearing is within a reasonable time.
It will be, yes. Mr. Andrews, do you have any objections to that?
I've stated our position.
Okay, well then, that's what we'll do with the agreement of counsel for the applicants or the appellants. That this will not be considered the last hearing, but we will not take any more testimony. They would submit to us some type of legal argument, and after the submission of that legal argument, I'll work on reconvening another hearing, okay? And it wouldn't be till sometime in May, maybe the early part of June. Okay, it won't be the latter part of June. I won't be.
We used to do that, have another meeting.
Well, we'd have to come back for a decision. Yes.
Thanks, Keith.
Well, I know I have to bite a beard.
Yeah, I'm hoping that we will identify a timeline this evening before we leave, with everybody's calendar available rather than.
Well, I don't have access to that, so we can probably pick a Thursday night and I'm safe.
You can't really make a decision tonight.
Well, he wants to submit it. That'll give him a chance. All right, let's, do you have a calendar there? We'll pick a date.
Are you gonna finish up with public comments tonight?
Yeah, I will. Let's pick that date, and then we'll take public comment.
I don't anticipate a lengthy submission, so I can get you something within a week.
I know I have a calendar here somewhere. Here we go. Well, the 22nd, or the 21st of May is right before Memorial Day. That won't be good. How about the 14th of May? How is that? Good for you? That's a Thursday. Huh?
Yeah, that's okay.
Is that good for you? Okay. And the next hearing will be May 14th at 7 o'clock at the Fire Hall. But if the Fire Hall is not available, we will meet at the Township Building, okay? And 7 o'clock p.m. Well, you want to do it at 4 o'clock in the afternoon?
Why don't you do this for, we're just gonna make a decision at that meeting. So it could be 4 o'clock, 6 o'clock.
Okay, let's do it 4 o'clock.
4 o'clock.
We'll do it at 4 o'clock. Okay, so the next hearing is 4 o'clock p.m. 5/14?
Correct.
5/14, which is a Thursday, here at the Fire Hall. But if the Fire Hall is not available, it'll be at the West Cornwall Township Municipal Building. And we do not have to publish this again in the paper because we are announcing the public hearing tonight.
If I get a submission by next Friday, is that adequate?
That's fine. If you need any extra time, let me know. I assume, Mr. Andrews, you don't want to file any brief.
If I do, it'll be limited to the issue I addressed at the outset of the hearing.
Okay, well, then we will not hold you file. Okay. Now's the time for public comment. I assume, Mr. Andrews, you have no testimony to present?
I do not.
Mr. Yoder, your testimony is complete? Is that it? Now, any public member of West Cornwall who are residents of West Cornwall Township that wish to make a comment to the board wants to come forward, and you stand in between where the two lawyers are. I know that's dangerous. Stand in between the two lawyers, okay? I'll swear you in, then your 2 minutes start, okay? This is like a marriage, you forever hold your peace if you don't say something now. Anybody have anything they want to say? Okay.
Mr. Kilgore, am I allowed to say something?
You are a part of the citizens group, am I correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Mr. Yoder said everything you have to say. I don't think we need any more comment.
I think a public comment, though,
Well, but
anybody.
if he's a participant, then you need to call him as a witness.
Okay, that's
All
fine.
right? If you want to be a witness, we'll do it that way. All right?
No, that's okay.
All right. Anyone else? Okay, then, but I think West Cornwall first. I know you're not West Cornwall. Okay? Anyone else, anybody from West Cornwall? Okay, we'll open to people who are not from West Cornwall, and they have 1 minute. Molly, you want to come forward? I know who you are. You want to raise your right hand? Swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give, the whole truth, nothing but the truth? You want to state your name and the municipality in which you reside?
Marla Pitt, and I'm in Mount Vernon Borough.
Okay. You're on.
The permitting process is very important when you have a company coming into an area that could have the impact it could have on the citizens in this area. When my husband and I put up a professional building in Lancaster 20-some years ago, we had to pay an impact fee. And that didn't have anywhere near the far-reaching impacts on that area, professional building, as this does in our community. The fact that Sunoco has chosen not to put mercaptan in these natural gas liquids is very concerning to me. Mercaptan is the scent that we all know and is familiar to us when we have a gas leak in our homes. The fact that these gases are being shipped out of the country, being used to make plastics, and it's too expensive to extract the mercaptan from these plastics, means that if there's a leak along Butler Road or on one of those farms, and a farmer goes out at night and there's a pool of liquid there with a volatile vapor cloud above it, and he turns on a flashlight, that's the ignition source that's needed. Or a child's out back playing and flips on a cell phone.
Time's up, Marla. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, anyone else from outside of, yes, sir, you want to come forward? You want to raise your right hand? Swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give, the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
So do.
And what's your name, sir?
Ralph Duquette. Spelling is D-U-Q-U-E-T-T-E.
And in which municipality you reside?
South Londonderry Township,
Okay. You're on.
just half a mile from the pipe. Years ago, I used to work as a litigation paralegal. And the process here reminded me how much I really don't like watching it dry. But it is very dry. And I did work on land planning. I feel like I've only heard half of the story, in big part because the county planner did not come here and testify himself. It sounded like Mr. Kim said he was ordered to do this and he ordered to do that, and he was taken over for somebody else, and he never really got the whole story in terms of what the process was. And I think that's a mistake. I would like to request that the county planner be invited, because ultimately it seems like the decisions came down from the planner, or maybe they came down from the commissioners. We did have one here. She didn't testify either. So that's all I really have to say. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Anyone else from outside West Cornwall Township? Yes, ma'am, you want to come forward? You want to raise your right hand, you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
I do.
You want to state your name, please?
My name is CCVT, it's spelled VITI. I'm from Mechanicsburg Borough, and the Mariner goes very close to us. And
You're on.
Pardon me?
You're on.
Oh, goes very close to us, and I really feel that our municipalities have let us down, and not because they're not people of goodwill. I think they've let us down because they just don't know. And I guess that's part of my responsibility, is to make them aware. I compliment you for offering us this chance to be heard. Thank you.
All right, thank you, ma'am. Thank you. All right, anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
Am I to understand that anyone that's a member of the concerned citizens of Lebanon County is not allowed to make comment then?
I'll give you a minute.
Thank you.
So raise your right hand. You swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
I do.
And you want to state your name?
Ann Pinka, P-I-N-C-A,
And which municipality you reside?
North Lebanon Township.
You're on.
Okay. I just want to say that clearly this has not, the process that should have been followed has not been followed. There should have clearly been a conditional use permit. Sunoco decommissioned this line and has now repurposed it to carry a completely different product that required new infrastructure, and that negated any existing use. And not only was the proper permit process not followed, but they started building before they even had the permits, and that is just such a flagrant violation of what should happen in our county, and I'm just think it's wrong and needs to be corrected. That's it.
Thank you. I let her talk. If you want to give us, I'll give you a minute.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fielder.
2 minutes.
How long will it?
Do I get 5 minutes now?
No, you don't. You want to raise your right hand?
Yes, sir.
Swear or affirm testimony about to give is the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
Yes, sir, it
You want to
is.
state your name, please?
My name is Phil Stover.
And where do you live? Phil?
I live at 80 North Cornwall Road in West Cornwall Township.
Okay, I'm
and-
still only going to give you a minute. Go
Okay,
ahead.
and the pipeline is 800 feet off my property line. And this is really serious because I farm organically, and anytime there would be any kind of an incident, it could affect my business. And all I wanted out of this process is for Sunoco to follow the same rules that I would. If I wanted to build a new building on my property, I would have to come to the zoning board, and I have to explain why I'm doing it and what I intended to do, and that's all I'm asking, that's what Sunoco should have done. And they built a property, they built a building before they had the right to do that. And if any one of us in this room did the same thing, we'd probably be asked to take it down. And so all we want them to do is follow the rules that we all follow by.
Okay, you understand, no matter what we do, we can't make them take the buildings down. We don't have that authority.
I understand that.
Okay. All right. Anything else?
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands. Yes, sir. You want to take your hat off, please, sir?
Sure.
Want to state your name?
Andrew Klein.
And raise your right hand. You swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
I do.
Which municipality you reside?
Heidelberg Township.
Okay.
I just wanted to share with you folks a story of something that I did. Myself and Zimmy's Automotive went together to put up a sign along the new bypass, directed traffic towards our business. We didn't have the proper respect for the proper procedures. It wasn't completely intentional, but we made some mistakes and thereby did not follow the proper procedures, and were very quickly informed that that sign needs to be removed. I wish that we would have been invited to come in and get the proper permits. That would have been great. That was not the procedure, and it's just a personal story. I've gained respect for how the system works, and I'm not sure if Sunoco had, did not or didn't follow the intention. I have no idea, but they need to have the proper respect for the way the system works as well. It appears to me that a conditional use permit would have been needed, but again, I'm just a farmer, I'm just a landowner. That's the story of something I've learned. Times have changed. We used to be able to get away with things that, sometimes, and times have changed. So,
All right, thank you, sir. Raise your right hand. Swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give, the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
I do.
Want to state your name, sir?
Michael Schroeder, S-C-H-R-O-E-D-E-R,
Let me ask you a question, Mr. Schroeder. I'm sorry, what municipality you reside in?
Anvil Township.
Let me ask you a question. We've had a lot of testimony, a lot of witnesses. Are you going to tell us something that we haven't heard already?
No.
Okay, then I really don't need, if you're gonna tell us something new, go ahead. If you're gonna repeat what somebody else said, we've already heard it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Just two brief comments. One is, Mr. Kilgore, you made the comment earlier on that you're proceeding on the presumption that this is a public utility, and I think that is the wrong presumption to make.
It is a rebuttable presumption,
It is a rebuttable.
not my words.
Okay,
Okay.
that's one issue. The second issue is that you are restricting this hearing and the entire proceeding to the actual structure of the building and not how the building is used, and not as what is inside the building. I think that is another sort of egregious violation of the intent of zoning, which is for municipalities to be able to control not only what structures go up, but how those structures are used. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else? Seeing none, we stand adjourned. Thank you.